We're so grateful for our care team, although many of you look like you're back. So yeah, thanks for coming. We have some other families out camping, but it's so good to be together. My name's Derrick. I serve here as our lead pastor. And if you're new with us, we're so grateful that you'd be jumping in. You're joining us in a series that we've been in now for several weeks called The Whole Story, where we're slowly walking through every book of the Bible from beginning to end. And don't worry, we're not like breaking down exegetically the entire book of every Bible every Sunday. So we won't be here till next month. But we are trying to take a faithful look into each book of the Bible and really asking this one question. Where does this story or this moment in the scriptures, where does it sit inside of the larger story that God has been telling since the beginning? And so just for a quick recap, in Genesis, we saw how God creates a good world, and then by humanity's attempts to rule things on their own, we kind of mess everything up. But God still shows his faithfulness by choosing one family and promising to bless all of the nations through that family. And then in the book of Exodus, we see that family become an entire people group, and that people group becomes enslaved in Egypt. God hears their groans and miraculously brings them out of their bondage in the Exodus story. And then last week, we saw in the book of Leviticus how God reveals this next step. He covenants with his people and then chooses to dwell with them in the Ark of the Covenant and in the tabernacle. And inside of that story, we see God placing his presence at the center of this people group. Which brings us to today's book, the book of Numbers. Numbers tells the story of what happens after perfect creation, after fall, after rescue, after the covenant, and after God has come close to them in the midst of all of that. And it tells this story of this people group learning how to trust. So I want to watch our Bible Project video together, and I'll be back up to help make sense of how God taught them how to trust in the larger narrative of the story. Let's watch together.
The book of Numbers. This fourth book of the Bible carries forward the story of Israel after their exodus from slavery in Egypt. God had brought them to Mount Sinai, and he entered into a covenant with them there. And despite Israel's rebellion, God had graciously provided a way for Israel to live near his holy presence in the tabernacle. So the book of Numbers begins as Israel wraps up their 1-year stay at Mount Sinai, and they head out into the wilderness on their way to the land that God promised Abraham. Now, the book's storyline is designed according to the stages of their journey. So the first section begins at Mount Sinai, but then they set out and travel to the wilderness of Paran. And then from there, they travel to the plains of Moab, which is right across from the Promised Land. Now, the first part opens with a census where the people are numbered. That's where the book gets its name. And then there are laws about how the tribes of Israel were to be arranged in their camp. So the tabernacle was to be at the center, and then around that, the priests and the Levites, and then around them, the 12 tribes neatly arranged with Judah at their head. Now, this was all an elaborate symbol about how God's holy presence was at the center of their existence as a people. This is all followed by a whole series of laws that develop the purity laws from the book of Leviticus. If God's presence was going to be in their midst, every effort should be made to make the camp pure, a place that welcomes God's holiness. In chapter 10, the cloud of God's presence lifts from the tabernacle and guides Israel away from Sinai out into the wilderness. And immediately things go terribly wrong. So in chapter 11, the people start complaining about their hunger and thirst and how they want to go back to Egypt. And then in chapter 12, Moses' own brother and sister begin opposing and bad-mouthing him in front of all of the people. This trip is not off to a good start. The next section begins as the Israelites arrive in the desert of Paran, about halfway to the Promised Land. And God tells Moses to send out the 12 spies, one for each tribe, so they can scout out the Promised Land. So when the spies all return, 10 of them say that there is no chance Israel can survive there because the Canaanites will destroy them. But there are 2 spies, Caleb and Joshua, who say that God can save them. But the 10 whip up the people into a fearful rage, and they start planning a mutiny. They're going to appoint a new leader and head back to Egypt. So God is understandably angry, and Moses intercedes on the people's behalf. He calls God to be faithful to his promises to Abraham. And so God does, but not at the expense of his justice. He gives these Israelites what they want, to not enter the land. And God sentences this generation to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until they die. Only their children will get to enter the promised land. Now, you'd think this severe consequence would wake them up, but it gets even worse. So in the next story, there's a whole group of Levites that begin a rebellion, and they challenge Moses and Aaron's leadership, saying that they have gone way too far. So God deals severely with these Levites, and he renews his commitment to Moses and Aaron as Israel's leaders. Now, as they leave the region of Paran and hit the road, it goes downhill yet again. The Israelites start complaining again about their thirst, and they ask why Moses even brought them out of Egypt in the first place. So God tells Moses to speak to a rock to bring out water for all of the people. But Moses doesn't really do this. He oversteps his bounds. He hits the rock twice and then says, "You rebels, do we have to bring water out of this rock?" So Moses dishonors God by putting himself in God's place as the one who brings out the water. And so Moses brings down on himself the same fate as the wilderness generation. He too will die in the desert and never get to enter the promised land. After this, the Israelites rebel yet again, and God brings a very strange judgment on them, venomous snakes to come and bite the people. And so Moses again intercedes on behalf of the people. And God tells Moses to do this, to make a bronze snake and to lift it up on a pole, so that whoever looks at this snake would be healed of the poisonous snake bite. It's a very strange symbol, but it speaks to the challenge that God has by being faithful to his covenant. He's right to bring justice on the Israelites' evil and sin. But even God's justice gets transformed into a source of life for those who will look to God for healing. From here, the people head into the plains of Moab, and the first main part of the section focuses on the strange figure of Balaam. So the king of Moab is freaked out at this huge group of people traveling through his territory. So he hires a pagan sorcerer, Balaam, to pronounce curses on Israel. And 3 different times, Balaam finds that he cannot curse them. He can utter only blessing upon Israel. Remember God's promise to Abraham from Genesis 12. So not only can Balaam not curse Israel, but God actually gives him a vision about a future Israelite king who will one day bring God's justice to all of the nations. This vision recalls Jacob's promise to Judah in Genesis chapter 49. Now, it's worth stopping to reflect on the flow of the book so far. The rebellion stories in the wilderness, they just heap up on one another, getting worse and worse. And while God does bring partial acts of judgment on Israel, he's also kept showing mercy, providing food and water along the way. And so the Balaam story, it shows God's grace in bright colors. Because here's Israel. They're down in the camp grumbling and rebelling, but up in the hills, unbeknownst to them, God is protecting and even blessing them. And it's this contrast between Israel's rebellion and God's faithfulness in the wilderness. That's what made these stories so important for later generations of Israel. So the wilderness stories are retold time and again by later biblical prophets and poets, and even by the apostles in the New Testament. And these stories always serve as a warning that while God will remain faithful to his covenant promises, he will also allow his people to walk away in rebellion and face the consequences. After this, the rest of the book focuses on the children of the wilderness generation, and they begin preparing to inherit the promised land. They take another census of the new generation, then they go on and win a number of battles with the people groups around them, and then a few tribes even begin to settle in the promised land. So the book ends with the new generation poised to enter into the land, and Moses is about to deliver his final words of wisdom and warning. But for now, that's what the book of Numbers is all about.
Who said the Bible was boring? It's just absolutely fascinating. I know sometimes when you think, especially about the Old Testament or even the Torah, you think about just boring books of the Bible. A book called Numbers does not sound interesting. You think about censuses and marching orders, and those things are there. And trust me, if you read that book over the last week, there were some moments that were just laborious. But that is not the heart of the book. The heart of the book is really about this journey. What's wild is the distance from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land, if walked directly, would take about 11 days. 11 days. But the journey from Mount Sinai to the end of the Promised Land for these Israelites took 40 years. You ever have anyone in your life that likes to go the scenic route? Even if they are using their map or Waze or all of the things that they think might help, but they end up getting lost anyways. This is these people. And it's wild that what should have taken 11 days took 40 years. And it says when they reached Kadesh Barnea, it says they chose fear instead of trust. I just want to look at this map together. Don't scrutinize it too much because I did have AI build it. So it's not accurate in a lot of ways. So those of you who are like experts in the Middle East, don't judge me. But you can judge ChatGPT. But what we see here is if you look at the green route, that's the direct 11-day route. But if you look at the other route that just kind of wanders around the desert for 40 years, that's maybe the route they took. We don't know exactly where they all went. We have some clues. But this shows an 11-day journey versus 40 years of wandering. And I think the map can help us see the ridiculousness of all of this. Now, put it away because it's not accurate. But see, what we see just by getting a glimpse at this map and even seeing this story is the book of Numbers helps us understand why it took 40 years. Because the problem for the Israelites was never about the distance that it took. It was all about trust. See, the path was short, but the process of learning to trust God took longer than they expected. Because sometimes the hardest terrain that we have to navigate is not the desert in front of us, but it's the doubt inside of us. And this is the journey that they're on. We see early in the book that God organizes the people, the tribes are counted, the camps are arranged, and each tribe has its place. And the tabernacle stands at the center of it all. And if you read these chapters, the ordering of all of this, it is so tedious when we read it. And sometimes it's easy to miss the importance of what's happening. But what we see in this ordering, in this coming together, is we see a scattered people who had come out of slavery becoming a united force, a group of one body who knows how to move together with God at the center. And freedom begins to take shape in their lives in very slow but ordinary ways. The covenant that made them God's people, and the wilderness became the place where they slowly learned to trust God, that he is who he claimed to be, and that they are who God claimed they are. This is where they learned their belonging. They learned when to move and when to stay. We see as the book unfolds, the journey just continues. And we get to this inflection point in the story, as there are many that we just saw. But there's this inflection point in Numbers 13, where Moses sends the 12 spies into the land that God had promised. He sends a subset of this group to go see it for themselves, to realize that it isn't just something made up or something dreamed of. It is something that is actual and real, and it's actually just right over there. And they come back, and the report divides the people. We see Caleb speak first in Numbers 13:30. He says, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." It sounds so promising. So much, clarity that this is something that we can go undertake. But just the next verse, 13:31, the other 10 say, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And we see this discord, this disagreement, these two totally different narratives of what might be possible. or even what is true. And I can't help myself but think about the different personality types that are made up of these 12 spies. And if you've been around makers for a little while, you know that we love the Enneagram and other tools that might help us understand ourselves and others. So I just want to, for a minute, go down this for a second. I imagine the Enneagram 1 is probably saying, we need a better plan before we do anything. The Enneagram 2 is worried about their families back at home, and they're saying, this could really hurt some people. The 3 is looking at the challenge and saying, we could do this. We just have to execute perfectly. The 4 is thinking, this whole journey feels overwhelming and tragic. The 5 is quietly gathering more information and saying, we don't have enough data quite yet. The 6 is looking at the giants and saying, this is risky. What if it goes poorly? The 7 is saying, this is so exciting. Let's go. The 8 is already halfway into the promised land and says, we can take them, come with me. And the 9 is saying, we can all just calm down for a minute. And can we all just get along? And so we have these 12 spies. 2 of them are very certain that we could step into this. We can go. God's got us. And the other 10 are saying, I don't think we can do it. And we see these different personalities, these different instincts, these different responses. All of that's human. All of that is important for us to know, that the way we show up in the world is so colored by our nature and our nurture and our wiring and all of the different things that are circling around inside of us. But as the story unfolds, something deeper becomes more clear. Our response to the world, our response to each other, our response to God is not just about our wiring. It is also about trust. 2 spies see the same giants. 10 spies see the same giants. 2 spies see the same land of promise. 10 spies see the same land of promise. But they trust God differently. And that difference changes everything. In just a few weeks, a very close group of mine, we're going to navigate on our own journey through the desert. We're going to do a bucket list trip that we've been planning now for many years, riding dirt bikes from the northern part of Baja all the way to the southern tip at Cabo. And this is like a bucket list trip for us. We've been planning it for a very long time. And it's something that we're really excited about. And for some reason, as we planned this trip, we chose not to pick the most direct path. We are zigzagging across coast to coast, all the way down to the tip of Cabo. And, you know, if you've been to Cabo before, it's a pretty great place to go, and it's a pretty quick flight. And the easiest way to get there is not on 2 wheels in the hardest terrain in dirt bike riding. This is actually the map. ChatGPT also created this for me. But this shows our map of Baja and kind of the route we're going to take. It's not specific, but you can see us zigzagging back and forth across the coast. We're going to do like 1,400 miles in 7 days. It is going to be absolutely grueling. But the trip didn't come together overnight. Like I said, we've been dreaming about it for years. We've been planning routes. We've been preparing our bikes and our bodies. And most importantly, we've been riding together for years and years and years, building trust with one another. Trust in each other's ability to ride. Trust in each other's ability to have the endurance and grit that it would take to finish the trip. Trust that when someone gets stuck, that we'll figure it out and stop and get over that hurdle together, or that when something breaks, if we put our minds and our scraps of tools that we have together, that we could figure it out. Because on a trip like this, you learn something really quickly, that you might go faster alone, but further together. And one thing always happens whenever we ride in any kind of terrain, especially tough terrain like this. Eventually we come to a section of trail that looks impossible. Loose rocks, a steep climb, a granite slab that looks vertical, a big step up that looks overwhelming, a washed out section that would look like it would bury your bike and you. And eventually someone in the group says, usually it's me, saying there's no way we're gonna get through that. And usually someone else or multiple people come around and they go, we got this. And a lot of times the saying is actually like, you don't got this, but collectively we got this. And I'll tell you what, there's been many times where Doug has had to ride my bike through a section that I could not get through. Nate never does because he's always out front. But combing his hair, yeah. And suddenly, the whole group is faced with this decision. Do we trust what we've learned about each other and our abilities? Do we trust the preparation? Do we trust that together we can get through this? Or do we turn around? In that moment, right there, that's exactly the moment we encounter in the book of Numbers. Because when Moses sends 12 spies into the promised land, they come back describing a place that looks incredible. The land is abundant. It's better than they could have imagined, flowing with milk and honey. And the journey there also looks impossible. And the spies divide. Two voices. A few say, most of them say there's no way, and two say we can do this. And the entire people of Israel must decide, what voice will we trust? And the story continues. And soon, as we know, the fear spreads because the 10 put their voices together and they convince everyone that it's a bad idea. Numbers 14:3 says, "Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" We see this complaint again and again and again up until this point in the story. And then verse 4 says, they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." They're not like, let's choose the brave, courageous leader. Let's get Caleb or Joshua and let's go take the land. No, they go, let's find a leader who can lead us out of this place. They were so close, but so far. They were standing at the edge of the land God promised Abraham generations ago. And then they turn around. In this moment, it connects deeply with everything we saw in the book of Exodus, right? At the Red Sea, they feared dying. On the other side of the Red Sea, they feared lacking. And now in the book of Numbers, we see them fearing the future itself. Every new fear begins to creep in and keep them from their destiny. They know God can rescue, but they are still unsure if God can be trusted with what comes next. And I think the book of Numbers, it shows us something about the human heart. Evidence alone does not produce trust. The Israelites had seen the plagues in Egypt, evidence. They had walked through the Red Sea, evidence. They had eaten bread that appeared from nowhere, evidence. They stood at Mount Sinai while the mountain shook and God gave the covenant to Moses, evidence. And they still hesitated. Why? Because I believe that miracles can convince us that God is powerful, but only relationship convinces us that he's trustworthy. Because trust grows slowly through the steady experience of walking with someone and learning their character. You can see someone do something remarkable once and still wonder, can they do it again? I know the guys that I ride with have thought that. Wow, Derrick made that section. And they're like, we'll see if he does it again. We can watch someone go through something once or come through something really challenging once and still wonder, could they come through it again? And that's the quiet struggle inside this entire story. Israel had seen God's power, but they were still learning to trust his character. And trust grows in ways that are quieter and slower than we expect. And God responds with these words that carry deep, deep sadness. In Numbers 14:11, the Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the signs I have performed among them?" That phrase translated believe, it's the same word as trust. How long before they trust me, in spite of all the signs I have performed? And God is asking, how long will it take for their hearts to trust me? And the journey stretches on before them, and their formation takes an incredible amount of time. In fact, a generation passes in the wilderness. Children grow into adults, and the story keeps moving, and the promise remains alive. And I think there's something here that speaks quietly and powerfully into our own lives. Many of us desire spiritual growth to happen quickly. We expect clarity and confidence to arrive on schedule. We want to be transformed by the renewing of our minds yesterday. We want he who began a good work to carry it on to completion now. We want to be over that hurdle or get around that obstacle. We want God to form us and shape us in ways that match our wishes and timelines. And he isn't only asking us to be patient with him. He reminds us that he is so patient with us. Not in a hurry for our perfection. Not in a hurry for us to get it all together. The scriptures and the whole story, they describe something more patient. Eugene Peterson describes discipleship as long obedience in the same direction. In this book of Numbers, it reads just like that kind of journey. Growth with God, our faith formed. It involves steady willingness to walk with God over the long journey of life. Morning by morning, step by step. Think about how trust grows in ordinary relationships. I often use this phrase with my kids at home. I use it at work as a firefighter, and I use it here at church all the time. I always say that trust is built in drops, spilled in buckets. Trust is built in drops, spilled in buckets. Trust grows through presence, through consistency, through shared experience, through time, slowly, drop by drop, drop by drop. And God forms his people in the same way. The wilderness becomes a long apprenticeship in the life of faith. It's slow and it's uneven, and there's wandering, but still moving. And what we see consistently throughout the whole story is that we are the ones that can easily tip the bucket and lose trust with each other. But God never does. He is always faithful. He never abandons, even when we give him good reason not to trust us. And something else I think becomes clear in this story as we see it unfold. As much as they wandered, the destination, it never disappeared. Even when they hesitate, even when the journey stretches longer than anyone expected, even when they get to the edge of the promise and turn around and walk the other direction, God remains committed and faithful to his promise and to see it through. In Numbers 26, we see it records another census, another thrilling chapter to read. But this time, it's the next generation. They had no firsthand experience of walking through the Red Sea. They didn't get to see all of the miracles their parents talked about. It is now an inherited story. Yet they are fully formed by this Levitical covenant. They are living in the way that God had invited them to live. But the promise was only something they had only heard about from their parents and those who came before them. And we see in this census, the numbers are different, the people are different, but the promise remains the same. God continues to lead his people forward. And what we don't see quite yet as this story or this book comes to a close is that eventually, that we'll see through the whole story, is that this promise, it reaches beyond the promised land and it reaches beyond the Israelites. Centuries later, Jesus enters the world. And in his ministry, in his time here, he also entered a wilderness of his own. He's hungry, he's tired, he's alone, and he is also tempted to secure life and to make things better by his own terms. But he refuses. Where Israel struggled to trust, Jesus doesn't. He entrusts himself fully to the Father, modeling for us what true trust looks like. And he walks the path of trust all the way through suffering, into death and resurrection, which, by the way, we're going to celebrate in a few weeks at Easter time. And through him, through Jesus, the promise to Abraham continues to unfold to all people. Numbers ends before the people enter the land. It ends before they receive the promise. They stand near the Jordan River, and the next steps are clear, but the book ends, even though the story continues. And I think that unfinished ending should speak to us. In fact, one of our core values here at Makers Church is that we are unfinished. Many of us live in places where trust is still growing. It isn't finished. We're in seasons where the future remains uncertain, where faith unfolds slowly, but we travel further together than we could alone. And God continues to meet us along the way. If you'd close your eyes, I just want you to reflect on some of this. What I want to invite you to do is pay attention to your own heart now and even this week. And try to name some areas of your life where trust is still growing. And also, notice the places where God has been quietly faithful. In the areas that he continues to lead you forward. Even if it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Or by meandering all around in the eventual right direction. And may we be reminded that all of Scripture, the whole story, points to God walking patiently with his people. And may you be reminded this morning that he who began a good work in you will see it through to completion. That he isn't finished with you yet. That he is patient and kind, faithful, never leaves, never forsakes. Jesus, we thank you that you model for us what true trust in the Father looks like. And Jesus, because of you, because of your goodness, because of your kindness, your trust in the Father becomes our trust when we put our faith in you. And so, Lord, we just pray that you would help each one of us take the right next step. And God, that you would help us as a community to journey with each other and move closer to you. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Amen. Would you stand and sing one last song with us?